has to be dropped, and the charges have to be dropped with prejudice, meaning they can never be reinstated again. They failed twice, 1968 and 1984, and it's been proven that there is no legal, ethical, or practical grounds for proceeding with this case, and that's a quote from Wayne County Prosecutor John O'Hare in 1984. Secondly, we're not going to tolerate people who are political leaders and fighters for the people being persecuted and brought under this kind of state repression. We've got a president running over funds, unleashing white supremacy and calling for people to be locked up. We've got an attorney general who wants to dominate the streets and is sending unidentified agents after protesters. This cannot be tolerated. And the third thing is to the press, to the media. What have you been doing for the last 50 years on this case? What are you doing now? This needs to be investigated. There needs to be questions posed to these authorities, to the Michigan State Police, to the Wayne County, to the state of Michigan, to the federal officials. It's intolerable that people are not finding answers to why they're continuing to harass Darnell. So with that, I'd like to bring up Attorney Jeffrey Edison to say a few words, and then I'm going to read some statements from people who are supporting Darnell.
All right. Hands up. Hands up, Darnell.
Hands off, Darnell.
Good morning. On behalf of my brother, freedom fighter and soldier for justice, Darnell Summers, we stand in solidarity in the defense of him against the ongoing repression that's been exhibited through state apparatus. There's been a lot of talk these days about police misconduct, law enforcement misconduct, and police abuse is not only the physical abuse, but the abuse of their exercise of authority over citizens. Police terrorism manifests in many different ways. The charges that were falsely brought against Darnell Summers initially in 1968, when he was an outstanding Vietnam soldier in Vietnam, trying to protect the principles that the country supposedly represents. He was in Vietnam. He became an anti-war activist and organized against the war. And at the same time, during the late 60s, was actively involved in the social resistance here in the United States that was resisted the oppression that existed then, the COINTELPRO program of the government, whose specific objective was to neutralize the Black Liberation Movement, focused on groups such as the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, the Republic of New Africa. It was in that context, specifically with what was happening out in Inkster, Michigan at the time, with the Malcolm X Cultural Center. There was a state apparatus that was an arm of COINTELPRO. In Michigan, they called it the Red Squad, that conducted surveillance, massive surveillance of activists and other folks who were organized against the status quo of the government at that time. And out of that surveillance of activists, a trooper was killed, and Darnell Summers was falsely accused of being involved in that. In 1968, he was extradited back from Vietnam, where he was serving in the military. The charges at that time that were based on incredible lying individual, the charges ultimately were dismissed in 68 because the government understood that they did not have a case against Darnell. Then some 13, 14 years later, after Darnell had left the country, he took up residence in Germany and continued his activism, anti-war movement, active amongst the troops in Germany, and also advocating against the repression of the military worldwide. The charges were reinstated against Darnell in 82, 83. He was again extradited back from Germany on the charges of first-degree murder. Each time that those charges were brought with first-degree murder, Darnell Summers was out on bond, which was an exceptional occurrence given the nature of the criminal justice system. But not only was he allowed out on bond, he was able to travel and return to Germany or outside the jurisdiction. At any rate, for the second time in 1983, the charges were again dismissed because of the incredulous nature and incredible nature of these trumped up charges against his brother. And now, 52 years since 1968, we're now in 2020. The government apparatus, the state apparatus, the Michigan State Police, are still engaged in their surveillance, oppressive surveillance of Darnell Summers. The surveillance itself is a manifestation of terror when that surveillance is unwarranted. And so, again, the state has saw fit to investigate Darnell as he returned to the U.S. To conduct his application of filmmaking. He's in the process of putting together a documentary at this point. So he enters the United States after several years of being away. He's stopped at the airport by Michigan State Police, questioned him, a form of harassment, asking about questions of he and his son in terms of people he knew and what he was doing, harassment, psychological terror, again, against this man. And so it didn't stop there, because a few days later, about a week later, he's about his own affairs with his friend and son, getting some gas at a gas station, and the state troopers then ride down on him, as we say, and with a search warrant this time for his DNA and to seize his cell phone. There was absolutely no physical evidence in the first and second trial. And what is significant is that the Wayne County prosecutor, John D. O'Hare, made a statement to the court on record that there was no ethical or legal reason to pursue these charges against Darnell Summers. He said that in '82. So now, fast forward 40 years later, they're still questioning him about this incident in 1968. And so the fact that they execute a search warrant for his DNA and his cell phone, another manifestation of terror. Cell phone, how could the cell phone possibly have any evidence of something that happened in 1968 when cell phones weren't even thought of in 1968? So we are here, we want the community to understand the pervasive nature of state abuse of authority, and unless the people become aware and collectively resist this, they will continue. And it is not until we raise the voices in opposition to what the government is doing with Darnell Summers, they will continue. Darnell Summers has been the voice of the voiceless, and he continues to be that. And as he continues to be the voice, we in solidarity express the will of the people to keep your hands off Darnell Summers.
Hands up.